Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the show where we take a stack of sources and build a comprehensive map of the world's most complex and fascinating subjects, designed just for you.
And today we are tackling a foundational figure, a man whose work is so elemental to modern music that, to understand him is to understand rock and roll itself.
We are diving deep into the sources on Charles Edward Anderson Barry, who everyone, of course, knows as Chuck Berry.
And our mission for you, the learner, is really critical here. We have to look beyond the iconic songs, beyond the duck walk, and actually analyze the architectural blueprint he created.
Right. How did a musician from segregated St. Louis manage to synthesize these really disparate sounds of rhythm and blues and country music?
And not just synthesize them, but apply this new electric energy, and then, and this is the key, write a completely new lyrical language that was targeted specifically at the post-war American teenager.
So when you finish this deep dive, you are going to possess not just the timeline of his monumental achievements, but also the crucial context around his very controversial life.
We want you to understand how that complexity, that mix of, sharp business acumen, lyrical genius, and repeated self-sabotage, how all of that actually molded the sound.
The sound that led critics to later dub him the Shakespeare of rock and roll.
Exactly. We will meticulously explore that genius blend of genres, we'll dissect the origins of his trademark showmanship, and we'll have to candidly discuss his lengthy history of legal troubles.
Which are so central to understanding his later persona, right? That whole road warrior thing.
Absolutely. And ultimately, we'll explain why, 6 decades later, he is still the single most important figure in laying the groundwork for rock and roll's entire sonic and, I'd argue, attitudinal foundation.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand the architect, we have to start with the foundation he built his life on. So, St. Louis in the 1920s and 30s.
The common narrative of the rebel genius often completely overlooks the very respectable, very solid background Chuck Berry came from.
Right. This wasn't someone who just appeared out of nowhere.
Not at all. Charles Edward Anderson Barry was born on October 18th, 1926 in St. Louis, Missouri. And his family was firmly middle class. They were highly esteemed within their community.
A black neighborhood known as the Ville.
The Ville, exactly. And his background is rooted in education and stability. Our sources describe his father, Henry William Barry, as a contractor and a Baptist deacon.
So a man of clear structure and faith.
For sure. And his mother, Martha Bell Barry, was a certified public school principal.
Wow, a principal. I mean, that's a powerful foundation that really emphasizes discipline, success, education.
It does, and it completely flies in the face of the rebellious image he later cultivated so carefully.
That creates a fascinating tension right from the very beginning.
It really does. And that stability, it allowed him to pursue music pretty early on. He gave his first recorded public performance in 1941 while he was still attending Sumner High School.
So he was already musically inclined and, had access to instruments and lessons, which wasn't a given for a young black man at that time.
No, it wasn't. But this is where the personal narrative takes this really dramatic, almost jarring detour.
Yeah, the middle-class stability is just shattered by a swift descent into serious juvenile crime.
In 1944, while he's still a student, he was arrested for armed robbery.
And the record is clear. This wasn't a minor thing.
No. He was involved in robbing 3 shops in Kansas City, Missouri, and then stealing a car at gunpoint with some friends. It was a really chaotic episode.
Now, his autobiography did try to soften that a bit, right?
Yeah.
He claimed the pistol they used was non-functional and that his own car had broken down.
He did, but, functional or not, the consequences were severe, and they were career-defining. He was convicted and sentenced, and he ended up serving 3 years.
Right up until his 21st birthday in 1947.
Yeah, at the Intermediate Reformatory for Young Men, which is now the Algoa Correctional Center.
But those 3 years weren't just, wasted time. He didn't just serve time.
Not at all. He applied that family discipline to his incarceration. While he was there, he formed a singing quartet, and he took up boxing.
And the sources say the singing group got pretty good.
They got good enough to perform outside the detention facility for events. So this wasn't just rehearsal. It was his first taste of professional performance, under some pretty high pressure.
So he gets out in 1947. He's a young adult, ready to try and get back to a conventional life.
He is. He marries Themetta Toddy Suggs in 1948, and they start their family. And he seems, dedicated to the working life. He holds down these jobs we often forget about.
Right. He was a working class guy before he was a rock star.
Absolutely. He spent time as a factory worker at a couple of different auto assembly plants. He worked as a janitor.
And the detail that always gets me, he trained and worked as a beautician.
I know. Graduated from the Poro College of Cosmetology, and he was doing well enough by 1950 to buy the brick cottage on Whittier Street.
Which is now on the National Register of Historic Places.
Yeah.
A real symbol of that early stability.
It is. But the lure of the stage and, the need for extra income, it pulled him back into the St. Louis club scene by the early 1950s.
And this is the moment. This is where the ingredients for rock and roll truly start mixing in the pot.
This is the critical incubation period. He wasn't just playing the blues, he was intentionally synthesizing different influences. He was borrowing heavily from the established masters.
He took guitar lessons from a local friend, Ira Harris, to kind of refine his technique.
And crucially, he was deeply, deeply influenced by the guitar riffs and the sophisticated showmanship of the pioneering blues musician T-Bone Walker.
And then comes the most important piece of the puzzle, the catalyst that really turns blues into rock.
The introduction of country music to his set list.
Especially after he teamed up with Johnny Johnson's trio in early 1953.
That fusion point is everything. The trio was a classic setup, playing R&B, ballads, but Barry insisted on throwing country tunes into the set list.
Which couldn't have gone over well at first, especially with his predominantly black audience.
Oh, not at all. The anecdote that comes directly from Barry is just perfect. It captures the racial and cultural tension he was navigating.
He wrote that he started laying a lot of our country stuff on our predominantly black audience.
And the initial reaction, he quotes them whispering, "Who's that black hillbilly at the Cosmo?"
Black hillbilly. That phrase just encapsulates the cultural boundary he was shattering.
It does. In the early 1950s, you have to remember, country music, often called hillbilly music, was coded as white, southern, rural. Rhythm and blues was coded as black, urban.
And Barry's genius was realizing that the melody and the narrative style of country,
when you combine it with the aggressive electric rhythm and blues chassis of, say, a Muddy Waters, you create an entirely new, completely irresistible sound.
and the result was potent.
It was. The sources highlight that while the audience was initially shocked, they eventually began requesting those tunes, that hybrid style.
Sung with the clarity of Nat King Cole.
But set to that raw, T-Bone Walker-inspired electric riff, it suddenly attracted a much wider audience, specifically affluent white people who were looking for something new and boundary-pushing.
He had, almost by accident, created the universal crossover language.
And that universal sound is what propelled him right out of St. Louis. In May 1955, he travels to Chicago, the capital of electric blues.
And gets the recommendation that changed his entire life.
He met Muddy Waters, who was already a legend. And Waters immediately recognized Barry's potential not just as another bluesman, but as something totally new.
So he suggested he contact Leonard Chess.
At Chess Records.
Yeah.
But here's the first point of real historical misconception. When Barry went to that audition, he thought he was there to sell his best blues material.
Right, the stuff Chess was famous for recording.
Precisely. Barry brought his deepest, most authentic blues, but Chess wasn't interested in repackaging another blues artist.
What was he interested in?
He was captivated by Barry's unique, amped-up adaptation of the old country standard, Ida Red.
So it was that country R&B fusion, that's what Chess recognized as the sound that could cross over commercially.
Exactly. And that adaptation became the foundation for Maybelline, recorded on May 21st, 1955, with an absolute powerhouse session band.
You had Johnny Johnson on piano, Willie Dixon on bass.
And Jerome Green on maracas. That one recording session, which produced a #1 R&B hit and a #5 pop hit, it effectively established the template for all of rock and roll.
The sources confirm it was just an instant, massive success, sold over 1 million copies, hit #1 on Billboard's R&B chart.
And Barry himself recognized the cultural moment. He said the success came because Afro-American music was spilling over into the mainstream pop at the exact right moment. He just provided the vehicle.
But the price of that success was immediate. And this brings us to the first major shadow cast over his career.
The Alan Freed royalty scandal.
Yeah, this is just a classic example of music industry exploitation in the 1950s. It was basically theft of intellectual property.
It was. When Barry first saw the Maybelline record label, he was stunned to see that DJ Alan Freed and one other person had been given co-writing credit.
And that co-writing credit meant they were legally entitled to collect a portion of the royalties.
In exchange for playing the record constantly on their hugely influential radio shows, it was a mandatory corruption tax on success.
The sources do confirm that Barry eventually regained full writing credit after a court battle.
He did, but the lesson was seared into his memory. Never trust anyone in the music business, and guard your money and your creative rights with absolute fanaticism.
This early theft is so key to understanding his later, really rigid business practices.
It's the origin story for that.
Let's shift to the positive impact of this period, though. From 55 to 60, Barry just perfected the art form. The sources credit him with three core innovations that defined the genre.
First, an irresistible stage swagger. Second, he established the guitar riff as the primary melodic hook.
That third, a revolutionary approach to songwriting. He treated it as high-quality narrative storytelling.
That songwriting is why critics still cite Shakespeare. He moved beyond generic blues themes of pain or simple R&B romance. His lyrics became vivid, graphic, and often highly humorous descriptions of teen life.
He captured the American dream as seen through the rearview mirror of a fast car.
Exactly. He wrote about specific, relatable cultural markers. High school dances, the anxiety of consumer culture, the thrill of speed, the conflict with authority.
Critic John Pareles articulated it perfectly.
Yeah.
He said Barry invented rock as a music of teenage wishes fulfilled and good times, even with cops in pursuit.
Look at the detail in the lyrics, even for the titles we all know. School Days is about the pure joy of that school bell ringing so you can go dance. Sweet Little 16 captures that specific adolescent energy and fashion of the time.
This focus created a deep, immediate connection with the demographic that was actually buying the records.
And this template produced an incredible run of defining singles between 1956 and 1959. Roll Over Beethoven hits number 29 in 56.
And then you get that string of U.S. top 10 hits that basically form the rock and roll canon. School Days, Rock and Roll Music, Sweet Little 16, and of course the definitive rock song, Johnny Be Good.
And if you listen closely to the architecture of those hits, the synthesis of influences is just right there. The defining opening riff of Johnny Be Good,
While now entirely his own.
is widely recognized as having evolved from a Louis Jordan song from 1946, Ain't That Just Like a Woman. Barry was a master recycler and refiner of musical ideas.
And the visual performance matched the musical swagger. He was a pioneer of rock showmanship.
Yeah, featured in early films like Rock, 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 and Go, Johnny Go. His presence was just electric, and he had that signature move.
The duck walk.
The duck walk. We know its origin was completely innocuous. He was retrieving a ball under a table as a child. But on stage, that stooping routine with the bent knees and the vertical back, it became the physical embodiment of the rock and roll stance.
A New York journalist branded it the duck walk during his first performance there, and it just stuck. Influenced generations of guitarists.
So by the close of the 1950s, he had reached the absolute pinnacle. He's a star, an investor, an entrepreneur. He owned his own racially integrated St. Louis nightclub, Barry's Club Bandstand.
He was financially secure through real estate investments. Everything was pointing up.
But just as his career reached its commercial and artistic apex, the dark irony of his life reasserted itself, and it brought his success to a violent halt.
December 1959. He was arrested under the Mann Act.
And we need to give some context for the Mann Act for you, the learner, because it's a crucial detail.
It's not just some obscure law.
No. Officially, it was the White Slave Traffic Act of 1910, and its original intent was to prevent interstate trafficking of women for prostitution.
But by the 1950s, it had become this notorious legal tool used to target and prosecute black celebrities and powerful men who traveled with white women, regardless of the explicit intent.
The specific allegation against Barry involved a 14-year-old Apache waitress named Janice Escalante, who he'd hired as a hat check girl at his club.
And he was accused of transporting her across state lines for the purpose of having sex.
The case was a media sensation. His first trial in 1960 resulted in a conviction and a 5-year sentence.
But Barry, showing that sharp legal mind, he successfully appealed. He argued the judge had made overtly racist comments and prejudiced the jury.
That win was temporary, though. He faced a second trial in 1961, which resulted in another conviction. The sentence was slightly reduced to 3 years.
After another failed appeal, he served 1.5 years in federal prison, from February 1962 to October 1963.
It's just a staggering break in momentum. He was silenced, completely removed from the scene, right as the genre he created was about to become a global phenomenon.
His last single before prison was titled Come On.
Almost a prophetic title for the music industry he was about to miss out on.
So when Barry was released in October 1963, the rock and roll world had dramatically changed. Elvis was still a force, but the whole sound was shifting.
When the British were coming. Ironically, the very bands that were now dominating this new landscape were the ones who ended up saving his career.
The British invasion gave him this unexpected, massive career lifeline.
Oh, for sure. Bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, they didn't just like Chuck Berry. They were obsessed. They basically acted as his international promotional team.
Constantly covering his songs, citing him as their #1 primary influence.
And that influence was already audible even before the full invasion hit. You listen to the Beach Boys' 1963 hit, Surfin' USA.
It's the entire melody of Barry's Sweet Little 16.
Exactly. His DNA was already woven into the fabric of the new pop sound, just waiting for him to come back and reclaim his throne.
And he returned to Chess Records pretty quickly, and the chart success he had in the mid-60s just confirmed his enduring relevance.
He released 8 singles between 64 and 65, and 3 of those were Billboard Top 20 hits, Nadine, You Never Can Tell.
And No Particular Place to Go.
No Particular Place to Go is such a wonderful example of his lyrical precision, even in his comeback phase. It was a humorous update to his earlier themes.
Kind of a reworking of School Days, right?
It was, but the central conflict involved the newly mandated introduction of seatbelts in cars. He was still writing about these hyper-specific, modern, teenage cultural anxieties.
Now, in the late 60s, he makes a brief but important move over to Mercury Records.
Yeah, releasing 5 albums there. This included the highly documented Live at Fillmore Auditorium, where he was backed by the up-and-coming Steve Miller Band.
So he was still a huge draw. He was touring the UK, playing major festivals.
He was, but this late 60s era, coinciding with the rise of professional stadium rock, is when his artistic reputation starts to get a little tarnished.
He starts earning this persistent reputation as a difficult and unexciting performer.
And this brings us to the methodology that would define the entire rest of his career, the Road Warrior era.
Why did he actively choose a touring style that seemed almost designed to compromise the quality of his own performances?
It was a direct psychological reaction to the exploitation he suffered earlier.
The Ellen Freed scandal, the Expense of the Man Act defense.
All of it. He believed, deep down, that the only way to protect his interest was to control every single variable and trust absolutely no one.
Which meant operating as a solitary, self-contained unit.
He toured constantly, carrying only his Gibson guitar, completely confident that he could hire any local band anywhere in the world, sometimes mere hours before the show, that knew his music.
And his contracts were legendary.
Strict, non-negotiable, and entirely reliant on these unrehearsed, local backing bands of highly variable quality.
AllMusic, when reviewing this period, described his live shows as increasingly erratic, sometimes sloppy, out of tune.
And noted that working with terrible backup bands significantly tarnished his reputation with new generations of fans who were expecting these polished, stadium-ready performances.
It's pretty sobering to realize that even someone like Bruce Springsteen had to work under those conditions in the 70s.
And Springsteen's anecdote tells you everything about the chaos of playing behind Chuck Berry.
It illustrates a complete lack of communication.
Totally. Springsteen recalled that Berry never provided a set list. The hired musicians were just expected to recognize the song based on his spontaneous guitar intro and jump in.
And after the show?
Nothing. Berry didn't speak to them, he paid them, and he disappeared. It was purely transactional.
And Springsteen, being the fan he was, actually backed him again in 1995.
He did. And central to this whole bunker mentality was his payment ritual, a direct result of those early financial struggles.
The sources detail his insistence on being paid in cash, up front, in a paper bag.
Every time, he would then count the money meticulously and transfer it to an attaché case he kept on hand. He cited being ripped off in his early career as the fundamental reason for this rigid cash-only policy,
ensuring he was never left chasing money or royalties ever again.
So his business pragmatism, which was born from exploitation, became the core of his legendary and sometimes infamous stage persona.
Now let's jump to the 1970s, where this erratic performer back at Chess Records scores the biggest commercial hit of his entire career.
It is the ultimate paradox. In 1972, a live recording of a novelty song, My Ding-a-Ling, became his one and only #1 single on the pop charts.
It was wild. It was a cleaned-up version of an earlier track he had called My Tambourine.
So the genius who wrote Johnny B. Goode and rock and roll music is defined for a massive 70s audience by a risque, double entendre children's rhyme.
As the critic Robert Christgau pointed out, the song hit the airwaves and gave a generation of listeners new insights into the concept of dirty.
It's an amazing, bizarre career moment. He followed that novelty success with another live track, Reelin' and Rockin', which was his last US or UK top 40 hit.
And his second tenure with Chess ended after the 1975 album Chuck Berry.
And then came the drought. His next studio album, Rocket, wouldn't appear until 1979, signaling a significant shift toward touring and away from recording.
But even with the chaotic nature of his touring and his strange choice of chart material, his status as an American icon was just unquestioned.
In June 1979, he was invited to perform at the White House at the personal request of President Jimmy Carter.
A moment of high-level national recognition.
Which was, however, quickly followed by another severe legal entanglement that same year. Later in 1979, he pleaded guilty to evading nearly $110,000 in federal income tax,
owed on his substantial joint earnings from 1973, a year of massive touring income.
So once again, the pattern repeats itself. A moment of public glorification immediately precedes or coincides with a legal downfall. He was sentenced to 120 days in prison and community service.
It's just impossible to separate the story of Chuck Berry, the innovator, from Chuck Berry, the legal liability.
Moving into the 1980s and beyond, the Road Warrior just continued his grueling schedule. He was touring 70 to 100 one-nighters every single year.
Always traveling solo, relying on the efficiency of his cash payments and those local bands.
He also maintained a consistent presence back home. In the late 80s, he bought the Southern Air restaurant in Wentzville, Missouri.
But for locals and fans, his most accessible gig was the steady slot he held for nearly 2 decades at Blueberry Hill.
That venue, a restaurant and bar in St. Louis's Del Mar Loop, it became synonymous with his later years. From 1996 to 2014, he played there one Wednesday each month.
That was his home base, a place where he could reliably deliver his sound without the global pressure of a stadium tour.
It was. But despite the consistency, the physical strain was immense. Even well into his 80s, the touring took its toll.
Yeah, during a Chicago concert on New Year's Day 2011, he suffered from exhaustion and just passed out on stage.
Had to be helped off. It showed the relentless effort he poured into maintaining that performance schedule.
The need to preserve his legacy, though, and celebrate his importance was really cemented in 1986 with that documentary, Hail, Rock and Roll,
which was organized by one of his most fervent disciples, Keith Richards, to commemorate Berry's 60th birthday.
The film just beautifully illustrates the breadth of his influence. It featured legends from across the musical spectrum.
Eric Clapton, Etta James, Julian Lennon, Robert Cray, Linda Ronstadt all gathered to perform with him. Richard's dedication to celebrating Berry's talent was palpable.
For guitar nerds, the documentary is also a technical time capsule.
It really is. The filming captured the specific instruments used, showcasing Berry playing his favored cherry red Gibson ES-355, while Richards played a black Fender Telecaster Custom.
And Clapton played a Gibson ES-350T, which is the exact model Berry used on his foundational Chess Records material.
They also filmed segments at his home, Berry Park, near Wentzville,
which, in a final flourish of rock and roll eccentricity, featured a massive guitar-shaped swimming pool.
Of course it did. Now, in stark contrast to these public celebrations of his genius, we have to return to the ongoing pattern of legal controversies that plagued the 1980s and 1990s.
Offering another layer of complexity to the man.
In 1987, there was an assault charge at a New York hotel. The sources cite accusations that he caused a woman serious injury.
Lacerations of the mouth requiring 5 stitches, 2 loose teeth.
He eventually pleaded guilty to harassment and paid a $250 fine.
And then came the devastating civil action in 1990. Multiple women sued him, claiming he had installed a hidden video camera in the bathroom of his Wentzville restaurant.
Was Southern there?
Right. And according to Berry's defense, the camera was installed because he suspected an employee was stealing cash from the premises.
He claimed its purpose was solely surveillance for internal theft.
Regardless of intent, the fallout was catastrophic. He opted for a class action settlement.
His biographer, Bruce Pegg, estimated the total cost to Berry was over $1.2 million, plus legal fees.
Though his legal team insisted he was the victim of a conspiracy designed to extort money from him due to his fame and wealth.
And during a subsequent police raid on his house, conducted as part of that investigation, authorities discovered not only intimate videotapes, but also 62 grams of marijuana,
which led to a separate criminal plea.
He pleaded guilty to misdemeanor possession of marijuana. He received a 6-month suspended sentence, 2 years of unsupervised probation, and was ordered to make a $5,000 donation to a hospital.
These incidents just demonstrate the persistent cloud of personal turbulence surrounding the icon.
And a final controversy that resurfaced that issue of authorship and credit, a theme that haunted him since Maybelline, came in 2000.
The lawsuit filed by his crucial early collaborator, the pianist Johnny Johnson.
Johnson argued he had co-written more than 50 songs that Barry had taken sole credit for, including some of his most famous works like Sweet Little 16 and Roll Over Beethoven.
This lawsuit was the final chapter in the unresolved tension between the two men over the musical synthesis they achieved together.
The judge, however, ultimately dismissed the case, ruling that just too much time had elapsed since the songs were written to pursue the claim legally.
It remains one of the major unanswered questions about the true breakdown of creative ownership in early rock and roll.
Let's end this complex life on an artistic high note, though. Despite the long silence, on his 90th birthday, October 18, 2016, Barry announced his first new studio album since Rocket in 1979.
A monumental 38-year gap.
It was. The album, simply titled Chuck, was released posthumously in 2017. It was a deeply personal work dedicated to his wife, Toddy.
And featured his own children, Charles Berry Jr. on guitar and Ingrid on harmonica, cementing his legacy as a family affair.
He died just a few months before the album's release, on March 18, 2017, at the age of 90. Emergency workers found him unresponsive at his home.
And the details of his funeral, held at the pageant in St. Louis, are just perfect rock and roll lore.
Following a public viewing, he was buried with a new cherry red Gibson ES-355 guitar, the iconic model he played for decades, bolted inside the coffin lid.
And the success of his intensely guarded business practices is reflected in his estate's value, estimated at $50 million.
Including $17 million in music rights. He learned his lesson about financial control and maintained it to the very end.
So what does it all mean? We've covered the man of paradoxes, but what is the distilled essence of his contribution to culture?
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame said it best. He laid the groundwork for not only a rock and roll sound, but a rock and roll stance.
The core legacy rests entirely on his ability to synthesize.
Critics widely agree he is the single figure who came closest to inventing rock and roll. He accomplished the definitive musical alchemy,
Taking the lyrical themes and chord structures of country and western,
and grafting them onto the electric, aggressive energy, the chassis of rhythm and blues. Maybelline remains the perfect textbook example of that fusion.
and that blueprint was immediately copied, which ensured his immortality. The sources note, countless significant popular music performers recorded covers of his songs.
Joe Perry of Aerosmith summarized the homework requirement. If you want to learn about rock and roll, if you want to play rock and roll, you have to start there.
Let's spend a moment on the technical how of his guitar influence, because it's often misunderstood.
It is. His guitar style was distinctive and incredibly effective, though maybe not technically accomplished in the traditional, shredding sense.
It wasn't about complexity. He was about structural perfection and elemental sound.
Exactly. He drew his clear, exciting sound primarily from T-Bone Walker, but what's fascinating is how he used technology to create a raw texture.
He was a master of transference.
He was. Traditional blues guitarists often used a slide or a bottleneck to achieve a soaring, gritty sound on acoustic guitars.
And Barry used electronic effects, often through amplification and early distortion, to mimic that sound.
He transposed that raw acoustic delta texture onto the loud, driving format of the electric guitar. This move gave his riffs that distinctive, sharp-edged sound.
And his showmanship was inseparable from the music. The duck walk, the one-legged hop, they weren't just visual gimmicks.
No, they provided the physical counterpoint to the music's swagger, influencing every subsequent rock guitarist who needed to capture an audience's attention.
Ted Nugent's famous quote drives this home. If you don't know every Chuck Berry lick, you can't play rock guitar.
And the critical acclaim truly elevates him to the highest tier of 20th century art. John Lennon's tribute is maybe the most famous encapsulation of his elemental nature.
If you tried to give rock and roll another name, you might call it Chuck Berry.
And Bob Dylan elevated him beyond music, labeling him the Shakespeare of rock and roll, acknowledging his lyrical skill, his ability to craft these universal narratives in specific, vivid language.
Bruce Springsteen, who deeply understands the practical application of rock and roll, offered the most comprehensive praise.
Calling him rock's greatest practitioner, guitarist, and the greatest pure rock and roll writer who ever lived. Robert Christgau, the dean of American rock critics, simply considered him the greatest of the rock and rollers.
And he was recognized by the institutions he helped create. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in its very first class in 1986.
That was preceded by the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 1984. Later came the Kennedy Center Honors in 2000 and the Polar Music Prize in 2014.
And his influence isn't limited to human appreciation. His music is literally immortalized as an enduring cultural artifact.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 500 songs that shaped rock and roll includes three of his cornerstones: Johnny B. Good, Maybelline, and rock and roll music.
But the mind-bending fact we had to circle back to is this. Johnny B. Good is the only rock and roll song included on the Voyager Golden Record.
This is the time capsule, launched in 1977, containing sounds and images intended to portray the diversity of life and culture on Earth to any potential extraterrestrial civilization.
Just think about that selection process of every single piece of music composed in the rock era.
The sound humanity chose to represent our species' musical capabilities, our energy, our history to the entire cosmos was codified by Chuck Berry. That is the definition of eternal status.
His legacy also lives on in St. Louis. An 8-foot in-motion statue was dedicated in the Del Mar Loop in 2011.
Placed directly across the street from Blueberry Hill, the very bar where he played regularly for decades.
And in one final stunning salute, in 2020, the International Astronomical Union named a small crater on Mercury after Berry.
He influenced culture from the dive bars of St. Louis to the surface of the nearest planet to the sun.
So what does this all mean? We've seen how Chuck Berry's genius wasn't just performance, but profound cultural synthesis.
He took the emotional depth of the blues, the narrative structure of country, electrified it all, and then applied it to the universal themes of high school life. He created the musical and attitudinal blueprint for modern pop music.
And that structure, those 3 chords, that storytelling, was so robust, so perfect, that 60 years later, artists across every spectrum,
from the stripped-down punk of the Ramones and the Sex Pistols to the garage revivalism of the White Stripes,
are still essentially building their careers using the foundation Chuck Berry poured in 1955.
The ultimate final insight, the core meaning of his musical revolution, comes from Berry himself, reflecting on why rock exploded when it did.
He observed that before rock, the music played by black artists had to be played on certain stations because the cultures were so far apart.
And he concluded that once the cultures begin to come together and you begin to see one another's vein of life, then the music came together.
This elevates him beyond just being a musician. He was a cultural connector, a figure who helped bridge the profound racial divide of the 1950s.
By simply writing songs about fast cars, high school, and good time songs that everyone, regardless of background, wanted to dance to.
And that connection brings us right back to the heavens. Consider one last time the profound significance of Johnny B. Good being the single rock song chosen for the Voyager Golden Record.
If that song is humanity's one audio representative of our genre to the cosmos, what does that choice tell us about the elemental, undeniable, and universally exciting nature of the sound Chuck Berry codified?
It is pure distilled rock and roll screaming, "Go, Johnny, go," across the stars. That's a legacy that truly transcends time, culture, and controversy.
A provocative thought for you to carry with you, the learner, as you revisit the incredible catalog of Chuck Berry, the architect, the poet, the pioneer, and the eternal, complex voice of rock.